you know what nobody talks about. Some of the most intelligent, emotionally aware people you will ever meet are also some of the most exhausted. Not from doing too much, from thinking too much. They replay conversations that ended hours ago, word by word, tone by tone, wondering if they said the wrong thing. They map out scenarios that may never happen, building entire mental simulations of futures that exist only in their head. They lie awake at 2 a.m., not because something went wrong, but because their brain simply refuses to stop asking, what if? And here's the psychological paradox sitting at the center of all of this. The very cognitive habit that makes someone thoughtful, careful, and deeply empathetic is the exact same habit that quietly, relentlessly drains them. Today we're going to go inside the psychology of people who think too much. Not to fix them, not to tell them to just relax, but to actually explain what is happening in their brain, in their nervous system, in their history, and what it genuinely reveals about who they are. Because here's what I want you to understand by the end of this video. Overthinking is not a personality flaw. It is not weakness. It is not instability. It is a story the brain learned to tell. And once you understand why it learned that story, everything about it starts to make a different kind of sense. We're going to cover 3 things. First, what is actually happening neurologically when someone overthinks? The real brain science, not the oversimplified version. Second, where this pattern comes from, because for most overthinkers, it didn't start in adulthood. And third, what this pattern actually reveals about a person. And this part might genuinely surprise you. Let's start with the brain. Psychologists have a name for this pattern. They call it maladaptive rumination, a tendency for the mind to circle back to the same thought loops again and again, especially around uncertainty, past events, or social situations. And the first thing research tells us, and this matters, is that the people who do this most intensely are not doing it because they're weak. Studies out of Yale and the University of Michigan have consistently found that chronic ruminators tend to have brains that are exceptionally good at pattern recognition. Always scanning, always processing, always searching for meaning in the noise. The problem isn't the intelligence. The problem is that the system never gets a signal to stop. Neurologically, this comes down to 2 key structures. The first is the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, analysis, and self-reflection. In overthinkers, this region stays highly active, even during downtime. Most people's brains shift into lower gear when they rest. The overthinkers doesn't. The second is the default mode network, the brain's background processing system. This is what generates the constant internal monologue. The voice that narrates, interprets, replays, and anticipates. In most people, these 2 systems take turns. In the overthinker, they run simultaneously. The result is a mind that is essentially always online, always auditing, always drafting responses to conversations that haven't happened yet. Does that sound familiar? Because if it does, I want you to hold on to something. That is not a broken brain. That is an exceptionally active one. And here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. Dopamine. Your brain releases small amounts of dopamine during problem solving. Not just real problem solving, imagined problem solving too. So when an overthinker runs through a scenario, analyzing every angle, constructing mental arguments, simulating outcomes, the brain is being chemically rewarded, not for arriving at an answer, just for thinking. This is why telling someone to just stop thinking about it is, and I mean this precisely, neurologically naive. The brain has a chemical incentive to keep going. Cognitive psychologists call this the illusion of mental progress. The mind feels like it's solving something. It's generating activity. It feels productive. But it's actually just looping. Processing and ruminating feel almost identical from the inside. That line, between working something out and going in circles, is almost invisible until you've already crossed it. So that's what's happening in the brain right now, in this moment. But the question most people never ask is, how did it get this way? Because for most overthinkers, this didn't start last week. It didn't start last year. It started a long time ago. And the reason it started makes complete sense. For a large number of overthinkers, the habit begins in childhood or adolescence, and it begins for a very logical reason. When a child grows up in a household where moods shifted without warning, where the emotional weather changed unpredictably, or where mistakes had consequences that felt disproportionate or hard to read, the young brain makes a very rational calculation. Think ahead. Anticipate everything. If you can predict what's coming, maybe you can protect yourself. Think about what that means for a moment. Overthinking, in this context, is not a disorder. It is not a defect. It is a deeply intelligent adaptation. A young nervous system reading an unpredictable environment, learning to stay one step ahead. The brain that learned to over-prepare, over-analyze, over-anticipate, was doing exactly what brains are designed to do. It was keeping its person safe. The problem is that survival strategies don't always know when the danger is over. The nervous system that learned to stay alert stays alert. Even in safe rooms, even with safe people, even years and years after the original environment is gone. Not all overthinking looks the same, though. Psychologists identify two distinct types, and understanding the difference matters. The first is reflective rumination. This is when the person turns inward to understand themselves, process emotion, and make sense of the world. When balanced, this is genuinely a strength. Research consistently links it to higher emotional intelligence and deeper self-awareness. The second is brooding rumination, a more passive, often distressing pattern of dwelling on problems without moving toward resolution. This is where overthinking starts to cost people, in sleep, in decision-making, in the social anxiety that builds from overanalyzing every interaction. And here's the tricky part. Most overthinkers move between both. A single moment of reflection can slide almost invisibly into a spiral. 1 minute, you're processing something genuinely. The next, you're 3 layers deep into a scenario that started from a sentence someone said 4 days ago. Think of it like a browser with too many tabs open. Most tabs are doing something useful, but a few of them are just loading and loading and loading. And the system slows down, not because anything is broken, but because nothing has been closed. The overthinker's mind isn't broken, it just hasn't found the signal, or the safety, to close the tabs. Which brings us to something the research says about overthinkers that most people never hear. Because so far, we've talked about the cost, the exhaustion, the loops. But what does this pattern actually reveal about a person? The answer is more interesting than you might expect. In 2013, a study published in the journal Psychological Science found something striking. People who reported higher levels of rumination also scored significantly higher on measures of cognitive empathy, the ability to understand and anticipate how others think and feel. On average, they were more sensitive to social nuance, more aware of how words land, more attuned to the unspoken emotional texture of a room. The very engine that makes overthinking so exhausting is also what makes these people remarkably perceptive. Think about what that means. The person who replays conversations isn't doing it because they're insecure. They're doing it because they notice things. They catch the slight hesitation in someone's voice. The word that was chosen over a different word. The thing that was almost said but wasn't. Their brain isn't just processing, it's reading. But here's the tension that overthinkers live inside every single day. Deception without resolution is exhausting. You notice everything. You feel the weight of every possibility. And yet, the more you think, the harder clarity seems to become. Because the mind cannot think its way out of every problem. Some things have to be felt. Some things have to be decided. Some things have to be released, not solved, not analyzed one more time from a slightly different angle. Just let go. Therapists who work with chronic overthinkers don't try to stop the thoughts. They focus on changing the relationship to them. Acceptance and commitment therapy, for example, teaches a concept called cognitive diffusion, the practice of observing thoughts without fusing with them, noticing the loop without being pulled into it. The shift sounds small. It is not small. Instead of, this situation is dangerous and I need to figure it out, the reframe becomes, my brain is generating a concern right now. One pulls you in. The other gives you a fraction of distance. And sometimes that fraction is everything. Let's bring this together. Overthinking is not a character flaw. It is not evidence of weakness, instability, or a mind that needs to be fixed. At its core, it is a highly active mind that learned, at some point, for very good reasons, to stay alert in a world that once felt uncertain. It was protection, not dysfunction. The prefrontal cortex that never fully switches off. The default mode network running its internal monologue, even in quiet rooms. The dopamine loop that rewards the act of thinking just for thinking. These are not signs of a broken system. They are signs of a system that worked very hard and simply hasn't been given permission to rest. The challenge isn't to stop the thinking entirely. That's not a realistic goal, and it's not the right one. The challenge is to gently, patiently teach that mind that it is finally safe enough to rest. We all carry cognitive patterns shaped by experiences we didn't choose. Understanding those patterns doesn't erase them, but it does change how much power they have over us. And sometimes, that understanding is exactly where it begins. If this resonated, if any part of this felt like something you've been carrying for a long time without quite having the words for it, I'd really like to know. Drop it in the comments, not for engagement, because these conversations actually matter, and the people who watch this channel tend to have things worth saying. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is the kind of content we make here. Psychology explained honestly, without the oversimplification. If that's something you want more of, the subscribe button is right there. Take care of your mind. It's been working harder than you know.